12:04 UTC, August 11, 2025. From the calm waters around Scarborough Shoal, chaos suddenly erupted. About 12 nautical miles from the shoal, the Philippine Coast Guard cutter, Barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas Suluan, was approaching from the south, together with two small civilian relief boats carrying food and fuel for the fishermen. But behind them, the Chinese Coast Guard ship, China Coast Guard 3104, was quickly catching up. Its water cannon was already firing, sending a long burst of water hitting the front of the Suluan like a steel whip. At this distance, the impact of the water jets was like a sledgehammer blow that could shatter windows and knock down anyone standing on the deck. But what came next was even more dangerous. From the left side, the shadow of a giant ship slowly began to appear. The People's Liberation Army Navy destroyer hull 164 is not intended to block civilians. This is a warship, fully armed and moving quickly in the middle of the disputed territory. Now, 3 ships are simultaneously heading toward a single point at sea, gradually being boxed into a very narrow space. The China Coast Guard 3104 is focused on the bow and suddenly turns the wheel to block it. Meanwhile, the destroyer, unaware of the movements of the other Chinese vessel, just continues on its course. 2 ships are on a direct collision course, just seconds from crashing. In situations like this, mistakes aren't allowed. It's also hard to explain why 2 ships from the same country almost collided. Scarborough Shoal looks like a simple ring of shallow reefs with turquoise waters. In the South China Sea, it's like a loaded gun. It's within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, around 124 nautical miles from Luzon's coast. According to United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Philippines should have control over this, but in 2012, a Chinese ship blockaded it and never left. Since then, Beijing has strengthened its claims using the Coast Guard, maritime militia, and sometimes even warships to send a message, and truly neither side is backing down. But wait, before we continue with the video, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with this kind of content. So back to the video. On August 11, the Barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas' mission in Luzon was supposed to be simple. Accompanied by 2 relief boats going to the fishing ground near the shoal, deliver the supplies, and return to port. But any Philippine ship entering near Scarborough Shoal is almost always followed. Sometimes they're aggressive, and these are Chinese ships. That day, China Coast Guard 3104 and the Chinese destroyer with hull number 164 arrived on the scene. This wasn't for a relief mission. This Type 052D Luyang 3 guided missile destroyer features vertical launch cells, anti-ship missiles, and long-range radar. These are weapons for war, not for civilian escort. Usually, the PLA Navy destroyer is in formation when patrolling, but on that day, it was moving closer than usual to the Chinese Coast Guard charter, probably as part of a tighter and layered blockade. In an ideal world, ships from the same country should communicate to avoid accidents. But when things move fast, tempers flare, and no one wants to answer the radio, the rules and what really happens at sea drift apart. And when the Barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas Suluan emerged from Seoul's shadow, the chase began. The China Coast Guard 3104, a 1,500-ton Chinese Coast Guard cutter, really seemed to push its twin diesel engines to the limit. Water sprayed up at the bow as it quickly closed the distance. Its target was the Philippine patrol ship escorting 2 slow-moving civilian relief boats. They no longer hid their intentions. Their water cannon exploded, hitting the deck of the Suluan with powerful bursts of water strong enough to knock people down and throw them overboard in seconds. In such encounters, water cannons are the main tool for harassment. On paper, it's non-lethal, but at close range, it can shatter glass, knock off antennas, and cause dangerous flooding on the deck. For the crew of the boat, every blast of water feels like a punch from an enemy. They're forced to huddle behind the armored shield while taking the pounding of the waves. But there's something different about this chase, the angle of approach of the Chinese cutter. Instead of following directly behind, the captain of the China Coast Guard steered the ship wide to the left and tried to cut off the path of the Suluan. This is a classic interception maneuver used to force another ship to change course. At a speed of almost 20 knots, there was really very little room for error. The lookout called on the radio, but no one answered, and the China Coast Guard cutter kept approaching, its siren blaring and mixing with the hiss of the water cannon. The Philippine vessel maintained its course, taking care to avoid any action seen as aggressive. This is where the blunder began. Behind the cloudy spray, the PLA Navy destroyer's massive shadow slowly appears. It's not just crossing the path of the tugboat, it's also crossing right in front of the destroyer's bow. The China Coast Guard captain is focused on blocking the tugboat. He didn't notice how little space there was between them and the warship. By the time the destroyer's crew signaled the danger, it was already too late. The lead cutter, aiming to pass left of the destroyer, crashed into it. The impact was really intense. The steel at the bow of the cutter was crumpled as if it were paper crushed by a fist. The forward gun mount broke and its shield warped from the impact. You could really hear the bulkhead creaking as it gave way. The destroyer suffered only surface damage. Long, rough scratches marred the port plating, stripping paint and exposing bare metal. But the shock was felt throughout the whole hull. Equipment shook. The crew stood up and those on watch inside shouted. A few crewmen were still visible on the cutter's forward deck just before the collision. They leaned on the rail watching the chase, but vanished from sight when the bow struck, and they were likely thrown back because of the sudden stop. It's not clear if they were injured or simply buried under the debris of metal. In the first few seconds after the impact, the scene was pure chaos. The destroyer's horn blared as the cutter's engine died. On the BHF radio, the Philippine crew immediately offered medical assistance, man overboard search, damage control team, anything. They were ready to help. But every call was met with silence. The destroyer slowly backed away, turning around while the cutter was almost submerged at the bow, leaning into the water and no longer moving with the waves. To use a lighter term, you could say it was unseaworthy, but in operational reality, the fight was over for this one. China's chase continued past a warning shot. Instead, it ended with damage to their own ship right in front of the Philippine vessel they tried to intimidate. On the deck of Barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas Suluan, the crew was met with a mix of shock and disbelief. Just a few minutes earlier, they were preparing for another blast from the water cannon. But what they saw was the Chinese cutter crashing into its own Navy destroyer. A deep and piercing sound of metal echoed across the sea. Through the binoculars, the Philippine officer saw the crew on the forward deck of the China Coast Guard stumbling, clinging to the railing, and some even disappearing behind the crumpled bow. The cutter's deck was exposed with no heavy safety gear like those on a warship, and at that speed, a sudden stop was enough to throw a person several meters. The Suluan radio operator acted quickly, offering medical help and search and rescue to the Chinese vessel, but received no response. They repeated the offer in English and Mandarin, but there was still no response. The destroyer was already focused on its own ship. Damage control teams inspected the long scratch on the port side. The cutter's crew gathered at the back, away from the crumpled front, moving slowly and carefully. To the Philippine crew, the silence was meaningful. If they accepted help from the very ship they were pursuing, it would become a big problem in terms of politics and propaganda. They would rather handle the situation themselves, even if every minute was critical for anyone who might have been hurt. At this point, the two civilian relief boats had already moved away, carefully avoiding the line of conflict. For them, the mission should have been simple: to deliver food and fuel to the fishermen. Instead of a typical trip, they saw an international confrontation live and unfiltered. And for the Chinese crew, they could no longer escape the truth. Their high-speed interception ended in a collision between their own ships, all in front of foreign witnesses. After a few hours, Manila made a clear statement. Philippine Coast Guard spokesman Commodore J. Triella described the incident as atrocious and inane. A reckless, dangerous act that openly violates COLREG, the international law that sets the rules on how to avoid collisions at sea. He also said the Chinese cutter's actions weren't just careless. The three ships' crews were put at risk, and it could have triggered a bigger crisis. Triella confirmed Barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas Suluan quickly offered help after the impact. We offered medical search and rescue assistance, but they refused. He talks a lot to the media. For Manila, that refusal is a clear message. Beijing would rather save face even if it means risking safety. But Beijing's tone is very different. Chinese Coast Guard spokesman Gan Yu confirmed a maritime encounter, but did not mention a collision. Instead, he described the operation as monitoring, pressuring, blocking, and controlling. Actions, he said, were legitimate law enforcement in what they consider their own waters. No photos showed the cutter was damaged. Chinese state media didn't admit it, show close-ups, or display wreckage. The next day, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. delivered a clear message. "We cannot be stopped. These are our fishermen, our sea, and our duty." He said this at the press briefing. For outside observers, the difference in perspective is clear. One side refers to the incident as a dangerous miscalculation that almost turned into a disaster. Meanwhile, the other side considers it a routine enforcement patrol where nothing unusual happened. Diplomatic channels are silent. There's no joint investigation, hotline call, or public statement from either navy. In the South China Sea, the silence after the incident is as deep as the event itself. And in that silence, it says a lot. That Scarborough Shoal is more than just a disputed reef. It's a chess piece in one of the most important maritime choke points in the world. It is located within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, but since 2012, it has been controlled by China using an almost permanent blockade by Coast Guard vessels and maritime militia. In 2016, a United Nations arbitral tribunal decided that China's claim has no basis according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea or United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. However, Beijing refused the decision. For Manila, every patrol near Scarborough is a statement of resolve. The Philippines will not give up its rights according to international law. For Beijing, each interception shows that Chinese ships control the sea, not just official documents or United Nations decisions. The August 11 incident is the latest in a series of confrontations. Recently, the Chinese Coast Guard cutter has used lasers to momentarily blind Filipino sailors. They have blocked resupply missions going to the outpost in Spratly Island and have sometimes rammed fishing boats. In every case, Beijing insists that they are only enforcing their sovereignty. The reason why Scarborough Shoal is so sensitive is because of its proximity to major shipping lanes. The South China Sea is a route for about 60% of global maritime trade with an estimated value of $3.4 trillion each year. Oil tankers, container ships, and bulk carriers pass through daily. If conflict occurs here, it will impact more than just the Philippines and China. The economic impact will affect everyone globally. The military aspect is crucial. China's growing network of military outposts in the South China Sea consists of artificial islands equipped with runways, radar, and anti-ship missiles. From this position, the PLA Navy can monitor and control vast areas of the waters. If the military develops Scarborough Shoal, it will bring control nearer to the Philippines. Analysts refer to all this as a gray zone tactic. Show control without starting an all-out war. Water cannon instead of bullets. Ramming instead of missile strikes. The collision on August 11 was unintentional, but it's part of the high-stakes game where every move tests the resolve and patience of the other side. For Beijing, this will likely remain shrouded in ambiguity. For Manila, this is a record of a growing pattern, proof that even simple harassment carries real danger. And for the crew involved, they will never forget this scene. At sea, you recall when metal struck metal. A close collision was witnessed in the South China Sea. In the ship's cockpit, where the bow of a fishing boat collided at night, but it rarely reaches inside their own forces. August 11 showed that in the rush to intimidate, even the most disciplined formation can be broken. So here's the question. Do you think this was an accident caused by overconfidence or a high-risk intimidation tactic that backfired on them? Share your answer in the comments. And if you want to watch more of our future videos, subscribe now so you'll always be updated with this kind of content. So once again, thank you so much for watching. This is Noel Polo Television. See you on my next video.